Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kid Stories Podcast. I'm Phil Bechtel. Let's get into a shout out. Landon from Jacksonville, Florida enjoys the stories. Landon, I think if you were a character in the stories, you would be a speed ninja who wears a fire amulet so you can run at incredible speeds and you can blast fire from your fingertips. Pretty awesome. Thanks for listening, Landon. Today's episode is titled They're Back, Part 6. The sound of approaching guards, dozens of them judging by the volume of squelching, came from both ends of the corridor. Back door? Rocket asked hopefully, looking around the supply closet. Supply closets don't typically come with back doors, Goose pointed out. Mine does, Rocket shrugged. Standard wizard home design. Petal fluttered up to a ventilation grate near the ceiling. We don't need a back door. We can use this. The grate was small, too small for humans to fit through, but the fairies were already disappearing into it. Great plan, Rocket said sarcastically. If only we could shrink ourselves down to... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes lighting up. Wait a minute. He spun around and began frantically searching through the shelves. What are you looking for? Goose asked, keeping an anxious eye on the door. The squelching sounds were getting closer. This! Rocket triumphantly held up a small bottle of purple liquid. Minimizing mixture. 1 sip and you're fairy-sized for approximately 7 minutes. Approximately? Goose didn't sound convinced. Give or take a minute. Rocket uncorked the bottle and took a swig before passing it to Goose. Clock's ticking. Goose hesitated for only a second before drinking. The effect was instantaneous and bizarre. The world seemed to expand around him, or rather, he shrunk in relation to it. The supply closet, which had seemed cramped moments before, now stretched around him like a vast warehouse. The little ones, as Petal called them, zipped down and lifted Rocket and Goose up into the ventilation shaft. Just as the last fairy disappeared into the vent, the supply closet door burst open. Through the grate, they could see gloop guards swarming into the room. Find them, burbled one particularly large guard. The captain wants the prisoners recaptured immediately. Good luck with that, Rocket whispered, a mischievous gleam in his now tiny eyes. Now let's find your ninja friends before this shrinking potion wears off. I don't want to get stuck in these vents at full size. Led by Petal and her fellow fairies, they began navigating the ventilation system as fast as they could. Outside the fortress, Tim and Ray continued their distraction plan, creating as much crazy as they could. What started as a simple distraction had evolved into what Tim proudly termed Operation Complete and Total Chaos. Did you see that last explosion? Tim shouted as a particularly aggressive vine wrapped itself around a gloop guard, hoisting the surprised blob 10 feet into the air. Who knew moon mushrooms were so flammable? I bet Tubes knew, Ray replied. She knows everything about exploding plants. The brothers had discovered, quite by accident, that the island's plants responded dramatically to being combined in specific ways, and they were having a blast blowing things up while hiding in the forest. Tim? Ray tapped his brother's shoulder, pointing at a cluster of trees near the fortress wall. Are those trees, moving? Sure enough, a cluster of trees and bushes not far was shaking. The two ninjas watched as a small group of gloops rolled out of a secret entrance in response to the distraction. Tim's eyes lit up. Secret tunnel! Ray, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Infiltrate the fortress from below while everyone's distracted by our distraction? Exactly. Tim high-fived his brother. They darted toward the tunnel entrance, slipping past the distracted gloops. The passage beyond was dark, lit only by occasional patches of bioluminescent fungi growing on the damp walls. Good thing I brought a light source, Tim said proudly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out Sir Glowington, who blinked lazily in the darkness. Beetle lantern, Ray nodded approvingly. Very resourceful. They crept deeper into the tunnel, following its winding path beneath the fortress. The sound of squelching alarms echoed from somewhere above them. "Something's got the gloops stirred up," Ray whispered. "Probably Ben making his dramatic rescue," Tim replied. "Always has to be the hero." The tunnel gradually widened, branching into multiple passages. Strange pipes ran along the ceiling, carrying what looked like liquid gloop material to different parts of the fortress. "Which way?" Ray asked, eyeing the diverging paths. A faint humming sound came from the leftmost tunnel, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats. "That way," Tim said confidently, pointing toward the humming. "Mysterious humming always leads to the important stuff." Meanwhile, Ben was making his way toward the prison cells. He moved silently through the corridors, avoiding the increasing number of gloop guards responding to the alarms. "They've got to be around here somewhere," he muttered, checking each corridor for signs of the prison wing. The fortress was larger than it had appeared from outside, with twisting passages that seemed designed to confuse intruders. A small movement caught his eye. Something tiny darting along the wall at floor level. Ben crouched, ninja stars ready, only to freeze in surprise. "Goose?" he whispered. The miniature goose looked up, his face breaking into a relieved smile. Ben, you made it!" Behind him, an equally tiny rocket and a swarm of fairies emerged from a ventilation grate. Petal fluttered forward. "Friends of yours?" she asked Goose. "This is Ben, one of the ninjas I told you about," Goose explained in a high-pitched tiny person voice. Ben, meet Petal and Rocket. And, sorry about the size issue. Slight potion situation." How long will you be?" Ben gestured vaguely at their size. "The effect should wear off any minute," Rocket said, consulting a tiny pocket watch that seemed to be keeping time in reverse. "Unless they don't. Magical side effects, you know how it is." As if on cue, both Goose and Rocket suddenly shot upward, returning to their normal size with a soft pop. The abrupt change sent them stumbling into Ben, nearly knocking all three to the floor. "Perfect timing," Ben said, getting up from the floor. "Now we just need to find Tim and Ray and get out of here before—" A massive tremor shook the fortress, causing pieces of ceiling to rain down around them. "What was that?" Goose asked, brushing debris from his wizard robes. "If I had to guess," Ben sighed, "I'd say Tim and Ray found something they shouldn't have." While the others exchanged worried glances, Ben quickly filled them in on what he had discovered in the captain's chambers. The journal, the plans for the device, and the captain's obsession with the valley. "So that's it!" Rocket exclaimed. "The moon crystals, the fairy dust, the magical ingredients, they're building a massive device to control the island's movement." "I think the captain was an ordinary gloop until he found a moon crystal fragment," Ben explained. "It changed him, made him intelligent. Now he wants to use this device to do the same for all gloops and create a mobile fortress to attack the valley." "And they're accelerating their timeline," Petal added. "The fairies overheard the guards. They're activating the device tonight because of all the disturbances." Another tremor rocked the fortress. The alarm squishing grew more frantic. "We need to find Tim and Ray, and then we need to stop that device," Goose said firmly. "Where would they be building something that big?" The fairies conferred briefly in their bell-like language before Petal translated. "The central chamber beneath the fortress. It's where the island's primary moon crystal is anchored." "And how do we get there?" Ben asked. Petal smiled, her tiny face determined. "We can show you, but we'll need to hurry. If they connect their device to the primary crystal, they'll have complete control over the island's movement." "Lead the way," Ben nodded before adding under his breath, "and let's hope Tim and Ray haven't already broken everything beyond repair." The group ran through the fortress, following Petal and the fairies. As they descended deeper into the structure, the walls changed from hardened gloop material to ancient stone, carved with strange symbols that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. "These are old," Rocket whispered, running his fingers along the symbols. "Like older than the island old." "The moon crystals were here long before anyone else," Petal explained. My ancestors found them and learned to use them to guide the island's movement. They reached a massive stone doorway, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols. Beyond it, they could hear a deep, pulsing hum. The device chamber, Petal whispered. This is it. Ben pushed against the door, which swung open. The chamber was beyond enormous, a vast cavern that seemed to extend deep into the heart of the island. Walkways of hardened gloop material connected equipment, all centered around a colossal crystal balanced on a stone pedestal. Dozens of gloops worked frantically around smaller crystals that were arranged in a circle, connecting them with tubes of glowing liquid. There were thin tendrils of electricity, like tiny little lightning bolts, connecting all the smaller crystals to each other and also to the larger main crystal. At the center of it all stood the captain, directing operations, the crystal in his head glowing brighter than ever. But what caught Ben's attention was the sight of two familiar figures crouched behind a collection of equipment, clearly planning something that would undoubtedly make the situation worse. Tim and Ray, he groaned. Of course they beat us here. The two brothers turned to Ben and silently gave enthusiastic thumbs up. Tim mouthed the words, "Watch this." He reached into his pocket and held something small and glowing on his fingertip. It was Sir Glowington, Tim's new pet beetle. The beetle leaped off his fingertip and flew in a wobbly path directly toward one of the smaller moon crystals right near them, landing on its surface with a tiny ting. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The sensitive crystal flared with blinding light, sending a surge of energy through the connected apparatus. The crystal cracked and vibrated and sparked, and the connection to the other crystals was severed. Gloops scattered in panic as equipment began to spark and smoke. The captain spun around, his gelatinous form quivering with rage. "What's happening?" "So much for the element of surprise," Rocket muttered, pulling out several of his wands. "Like I said," Ben sighed, drawing his ninja sword. "Tim and Ray." The end. Thanks for listening, friends. The website is kidstoriespodcast.com. Send all your drawings and things to kidstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Adios.